All right, ready to dive deep into OSHA record keeping.
Let's do it.
We're tackling this pretty extensive YouTube video today. It's from Safety One Source. It's called OSHA 1904 Record Keeping. Full standard.
Yeah, that one's a beast.
It is a great resource, but definitely a time commitment to get through the whole thing. So we're going to break it down for everyone.
Exactly. The pure gold. Just what you need to know.
Exactly. So by the end of this, you will be a whiz. You'll be able to spot recordable injuries like that, know how to navigate those OSHA forms, and even handle those tricky privacy concerns.
You know, it's funny. A lot of people think OSHA record keeping is just this big corporation thing.
Right.
But even small businesses, you got to be in the know.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was surprised to learn that businesses with 10 or fewer employees, they're generally exempt from the detailed record keeping.
It's true. And I think, this exemption really acknowledges the realities of running a small business.
Yeah.
You have limited resources, you're wearing multiple hats, so it makes sense to streamline where appropriate. Right.
But, and this is key, it doesn't mean you just throw safety out the window.
Right.
Even without those formal logs, you always want to cultivate that safe work environment, make it a top priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not just checking a box for OSHA. It's about, creating a culture of safety from the ground up.
Exactly.
So fewer than 10 employees, you get a little bit of a break. But there's still some must-report situations, no matter how small your team is.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, loss of an eye. Those are serious, and they have to be reported to OSHA immediately, no matter your company size, no matter what industry you're in.
Okay. So even like a tiny florist shop or like a two-person real estate office, they still have to report those events to OSHA.
Precisely. Those situations, because they're so severe, they trigger this mandatory reporting requirement.
Got it.
So it really underscores how important it is to understand those core obligations.
Yeah.
You're not off the hook just because you're small. Okay, so size matters to a point, but it's not the whole story. The type of business you're running also plays a role, right?
You got it.
There's industry-specific exemptions, too.
Yeah, OSHA recognizes that some industries just inherently have lower risks. And Appendix A to Subpart B of OSHA 1904, it lists those exempt industries.
Okay.
So you're thinking real estate, finance, certain retail sectors.
Okay.
But again, even with those exemptions, those big four, fatalities, hospitalizations, amputations, and eye loss, those always have to be reported.
Got it. Okay. So we've established who needs to keep records and who gets a bit of a pass.
Right.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
How do we determine if an injury or illness is actually work-related and needs to be recorded?
Yeah.
It can't just be everything that happens on company property.
Right. You're catching on it. It's all about connecting that injury or illness to the work environment.
Okay.
Did the work environment cause or contribute to the issue?
Okay. Give me an example. So the video used this example. An employee chokes on a sandwich at their desk. Happens at work? Is it work-related?
That's the perfect example. It happened at work, sure, but the work environment didn't cause it, so not recordable.
Interesting. So what are some other instances where something might happen at work, but it wouldn't be considered work-related?
Well, you think about common illnesses like a cold or the flu.
Yeah.
Unless it's a direct result of, some workplace exposure to a hazard, it wouldn't be recordable.
Okay.
Same goes for mental health conditions. They only need to be recorded if they're diagnosed as work-related.
Okay. What about that gray area of pre-existing conditions?
Yeah.
What if an employee has a bad back and it flares up while they're lifting something heavy at work?
That's where things get really nuanced. If that work activity significantly aggravated a pre-existing condition, led to a new injury or illness, then yes, it would be recordable.
Okay. So if their back pain was manageable before, but lifting that heavy box at work, causes a debilitating spasm or, leads to them needing medical treatment.
Yeah.
That would be recordable.
Exactly. The key is whether the work environment played a significant role in making that pre-existing condition worse.
Got it. Now, let's say someone has a condition like occupational asthma.
Okay.
That flares up every time they're exposed to a certain chemical at work.
Right.
Would we record a new case each time that happens?
That's a great question. In that scenario, each episode that's triggered by that work exposure, that would be a new case and would require a new record.
Okay.
However, it's important to distinguish that from chronic conditions like cancer or asbestosis, which are only recorded once, at the time of diagnosis.
Makes sense. You're recording the instances where work is that direct trigger.
Exactly.
But what if there's disagreement among medical professionals?
Uh-oh.
About whether something's a new case or a recurrence? Whose opinion takes precedence?
That's a tough one. Ultimately, the employer has the responsibility to choose which medical opinion they think is the most credible and then document why they chose that one.
So it's not just about, like, blindly accepting a doctor's note. It's about making an informed judgment call.
Precisely. And thorough documentation is key in these situations. You're not just recording the incident, you're recording the reasoning behind your decisions.
Okay, I'm getting a much clearer picture of how we determine if an injury or illness is recordable.
Good.
But what exactly makes it count in the eyes of OSHA? What are the specific criteria?
Well, the big ones are pretty straightforward. We've got death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, and loss of consciousness.
Yeah.
But there's another category that often catches people off guard.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Any significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician, that needs to be recorded. And this includes things that you might not think of at first.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Even a punctured eardrum or a fractured toe. Those require recording even if the doctor doesn't recommend time off or any treatment beyond just basic first aid.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
It is. It really highlights how OSHA wants to capture the full picture of workplace safety. It's not just about the incidents that cause these huge disruptions.
Yeah.
It's about tracking all those incidents that require that professional medical attention.
Makes sense. Now, what if a doctor recommends time off for an injury, but the employee chooses to come to work anyway? Does that still need to be recorded?
Absolutely. The record reflects the medical recommendation, not the employee's actions.
Okay.
It's about documenting the potential severity, regardless of what the employee chooses to do.
Got it. Okay, good to know. It ensures consistency and prevents employers from, maybe downplaying how serious something is. Now, let's shift gears and talk about privacy. I was relieved to hear the video address privacy concerns, especially when it comes to, sensitive information.
Yeah, privacy is paramount. And OSHA gives specific guidelines for how to handle those sensitive cases.
Okay.
And this involves keeping a separate confidential list for certain types of injuries and illnesses.
So what kind of situations fall under this privacy concern umbrella?
It's a pretty broad range, really designed to protect those employees in vulnerable situations. So injuries to intimate body parts, sexual assault, mental illnesses, HIV, hepatitis, TB, needle sticks, those all qualify.
Wow. Yeah.
And importantly, anything the employee specifically requests to keep private, that would go on this confidential list too.
So OSHA recognizes that some situations just require a higher level of discretion.
Exactly. And the video even gives some helpful tips for how to describe these cases on the OSHA forms without revealing too much.
So using broader terms to protect the employee's identity.
Exactly. For instance, a sexual assault could be recorded as just injury from assault, or an injury to a reproductive organ, maybe lower abdominal injury.
Those are good examples. It allows you to document it accurately while still, safeguarding the employee's privacy.
Exactly. It shows a commitment to both transparency and sensitivity.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We walked through exemptions, figured out how to determine work-relatedness, tackled those tricky new case versus recurrent situations, and even dove into the world of privacy concerns.
Yeah, and there's still more to uncover.
I know, right?
But we're just getting started.
Welcome back. We're knee-deep in OSHA record keeping now. And in this part, we're going to tackle the forms themselves. I got to admit, those OSHA forms, they can be a little intimidating.
Yeah.
All those boxes and columns and instructions, it's like, whoa, where do I even start?
I hear you. But remember, these forms, they serve a purpose.
Right.
It's not just about compliance. They actually paint a picture of workplace safety.
Okay.
And the Safety One Source video, they do a good job of kind of breaking them down and making them more approachable.
Okay, that's reassuring. So let's start with the big one, the OSHA 300 log.
Okay.
It's also known as the log of work-related injuries and illnesses. Where do we even begin with this thing?
You can think of it as like a master list.
Okay.
A chronological record of all those recordable injuries and illnesses in your workplace during the year.
Okay.
And the video just walks us through each section step by step.
So we're logging every incident that meets those criteria we talked about in part one.
Right.
Death, days away from work, restricted work, medical treatment beyond first aid, loss of consciousness, and those significant injuries or illnesses diagnosed by a physician.
You got it. And for each one, we're going to provide like a brief description of what happened and categorize it.
Okay, so far so good. But looking at the actual form itself, there are a lot of boxes to check and columns to fill out. How do we know what goes where?
Don't worry, the video demystifies all that.
Okay.
It explains each section of the log, from entering your basic company information up top all the way to like those tricky sections where you're counting the number of days associated with an injury or illness.
Oh yeah, counting days, that's where I always get tripped up.
And they know, right?
Like, do we count the day the injury happened? What about weekends, holidays?
All great questions. And luckily, the video gives clear answers for all those scenarios.
Okay.
It lays out the rules so you can be consistent and accurate in your record keeping.
That's a relief. Having those clarifications from the video is super helpful.
Yeah.
So we've got the 300 log, which gives us that overview.
Right.
But then there's also the OSHA 301 incident report, right? That's where we go into the details of each case.
Exactly. The 301 is like a zoomed-in lens.
Okay.
It gives you that comprehensive account of each injury or illness.
Okay, walk me through what kind of information we're capturing on the 301.
Okay. So think of it as telling the story of the incident.
Okay.
So you're going to record the employee's name, job title, the date and time of the injury, specific location where it happened, a detailed description of what occurred, what object or substance caused the injury, and even what the employee was doing right before the incident.
Wow, that's a lot of detail. It sounds like this form is really designed to help OSHA investigators understand exactly what happened.
Yeah, exactly. It gives that valuable context.
Yeah. Now, I remember being particularly intrigued by the video's discussion of privacy concern cases.
Right.
How do those cases work when it comes to actually filling out these forms?
Great question. So OSHA gets it. They understand the need to protect that employee privacy, especially in those sensitive situations. So for these privacy concern cases, you can't put the employee's name on the OSHA 300 log.
Makes sense. But if we're not putting their name on the main log, how do we keep track of that information?
Well, you have to keep a separate confidential list that links the case number on the 300 log to the employee's name.
Okay.
That way you can easily update the case if you need to, and also give that info to OSHA if they ask.
So it's all about that balance, right? Transparency for OSHA, but protecting the sensitive information of the employee.
Exactly. And the video actually provides some guidance on how to even describe those cases on the forms without revealing any identifying details.
It's like using code words, kind of, to protect the information.
Exactly, yeah. So let's say an employee experiences a sexual assault at work.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Instead of saying that specifically, you might just record it as injury from assault.
Okay.
Or, an injury to a reproductive organ, you might just say lower abdominal injury.
Okay, yeah.
So you're still documenting the incident, but safeguarding their privacy.
Yeah, those are great examples. It allows you to be accurate, but still protect the employee.
Exactly. It shows that commitment to both.
All right, so we've got our 300 log, our master list.
Right.
We've got our 301 incident reports, the in-depth details. We also have our separate list for those privacy concern cases.
Yes.
But once we filled out all these forms, what happens to them? Do they just go in a filing cabinet and we forget about them?
You wish? No, record retention is key. OSHA says you have to keep these records for 5 years after the year they cover.
5 years? That's a long time to hold on to all that paperwork.
It might seem like a lot, but there's a reason.
Okay.
Those records can be really important for, tracking safety trends.
Oh, yeah.
Or conducting investigations or, just responding to potential follow-ups.
So we're not just filing them away. We need a good system to keep them organized and accessible.
Exactly. And there's another crucial thing that people often miss, and that's updating.
Updating. You mean we have to go back and change things after we've already filled them out?
Sometimes, yes. So during that 5-year period, you might find out new information about a case, or the outcome might change.
Okay.
An injury that seemed minor at first could develop complications later on.
Right.
So you can't just assume that your initial record is the final word.
So we have to stay on top of these cases and actually update the records if we need to.
Exactly. And if you do have any changes, you'd update that 300 log, maybe line out the original entry and enter the new information.
So it definitely adds another layer of complexity to the process.
Yeah.
But I can see why it's important.
It's all about keeping those records accurate and up to date. They need to reflect what really happened in your workplace.
Okay, so we've decoded the 300 log, tackled those detailed 300 incident reports, and even figured out those privacy concern cases.
Yep.
We also talked about the importance of keeping those records and updating them.
Absolutely.
And there's still more to uncover. Welcome back to the final part of our OSHA record-keeping deep dive. We've covered a lot, from spotting those recordable injuries to mastering those OSHA forms.
Right.
But now let's tackle some of the more complex scenarios, like what happens when a business changes hands?
Okay, yeah.
Who's responsible for those OSHA records? The old owner, the new one?
It's a great question. The Safety One Source video, it makes it clear that both the old and new owners have a role to play. So the old owner, they're responsible for keeping those records accurate for the time they own the business. And then when it's sold, those records have to be transferred to the new owner.
Okay, so it's not a clean break for the old owner.
Right.
They got to make sure those records are in order.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And the new owner then has the responsibility to keep those records for the rest of that 5-year period.
But the new owner is not expected to, go back and update or correct anything from the previous owner, right?
Right. They're basically inheriting them as is.
Okay.
It wouldn't be fair to hold them accountable for, someone else's record keeping.
Right. But it definitely highlights how important due diligence is when you're buying a business.
Oh, absolutely.
Taking a close look at those OSHA records, it can tell you a lot about their safety practices.
For sure. It's not just about the legal stuff. It's about understanding that safety culture you're walking into.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's shift gears and talk about another common scenario.
Okay.
Multiple business establishments. If a company has several locations, do they need a separate OSHA 300 log for each one?
That's a good question. And it can get complicated.
Yeah.
But the video clarifies it really depends on the establishments. So if each location is going to operate for a year or longer, then, yeah, you need a separate log.
Okay, so separate logs for those more permanent spots.
Mm-hmm.
What about, those pop-up shops?
Right.
Or seasonal kiosks, the ones that are only around for a few months?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
For those short-term ones, you don't need a separate log. You can just keep a single log that covers all of them.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah.
I can imagine the paperwork nightmare trying to keep track of separate logs for, every little temporary setup.
Right. The video even mentions that you can include those short-term places on a log that covers specific company divisions or even geographic regions.
Oh, okay. So there's some flexibility there.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, so we talked about changes in ownership and multiple locations.
Right.
Now let's talk about the employees themselves. The video really stresses that recordable injuries and illnesses, they apply to all employees,
Right.
regardless of their status. What does that mean exactly?
It means it doesn't matter if they're full-time, part-time, seasonal, temporary, or even a migrant worker. If they're on your payroll, their injuries and illnesses need to be recorded.
Okay, that seems straightforward enough.
Yeah.
But what about situations where you have contractors working on site?
Right.
Or, temp workers from an agency? Are their injuries and illnesses recordable on, our company's logs?
That's where it gets a little tricky. The video explains you're only responsible for recording those workers' incidents if your company is supervising them day to day.
Okay, so if we hire a contractor to, remodel our office,
Right.
but we're not directly overseeing their work each day, we wouldn't be responsible for logging any injuries they might have. It
Exactly.
would fall on their company.
Right. The company that's doing that day-to-day supervision, that's where the buck stops.
Got it. So it's all about who's got that most direct control over the work environment and the
Yeah.
people in it.
Exactly.
And speaking of different work environments, remember those state plans? They can have different rules.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
I touched on it earlier, but it's worth repeating. Just because you know the federal OSHA guidelines doesn't mean you're good to go everywhere.
Right. The video really hammers that home.
Yeah.
Some states, they have their own OSHA-approved plans, and those can be even stricter than the feds.
So it's not one size fits all. We got to check our state's specific requirements to make sure we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's.
Absolutely. Got to stay informed, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you follow the rules wherever your business is.
All right, so we've journeyed through the basics of identifying recordable injuries, tackled those sometimes pretty intimidating OSHA forms.
Yeah.
We've even explored some of those tricky situations like changes in ownership, multiple locations, employee classifications, and of course, checking those state rules.
Whew, we covered a lot.
It's all about making work safer for everyone, right?
Easily.
And with that, we're wrapping up this deep dive into OSHA record keeping. Until next time, stay safe.